Welcome back to another episode of Green Dolphin Science. This is the deep dive, where we take a stack of fascinating sources and really dig into the most important insights for you.
That's right.
And today, we're plunging into something truly unexpected. I mean, finding radioactive material in everyday items you might use without a second thought.
Yeah, things like cosmetics and, well, healthcare products.
Exactly.
We've been looking at a key scientific paper that pulls together research on this issue from, around the world, and it examines the patchwork of regulations trying to address it.
Okay. So our mission in this deep dive is to figure out why these substances are ending up in these products, what levels are actually being detected, what potential risks that poses, and frankly, how confusing the global rules are around all of this. It sounds, well, complicated.
It is a bit.
Okay, let's unpack this.
You know, what's surprising, or maybe not surprising depending on how you look at it, is that the idea of adding radioactive elements to products isn't new at all. This paper traces it back to the early 20th century, really like the 1920s through to the 1950s.
Oh, like the old radium craze, where they were putting it in, well, everything. Water, chocolate.
Exactly that. Radio was a really popular additive back then, often marketed with these wild claims that it would energize your skin or somehow make you look younger.
Seems unbelievable now, but yeah, I've read about that.
It was definitely a thing.
And the paper highlights that, astonishingly, this practice hasn't entirely disappeared. We're not just talking history here.
No, not at all. Commercially available products today are still incorporating radioactive substances.
Yeah.
That's the core issue they're examining.
Wow. Okay, so what kind of products are we talking about now?
Well, the sheer variety the paper lists is pretty eye-opening. You might expect cosmetics, and yes, it includes things like skincare creams, lipstick, eyeshadow, even cellulite cream and perfume. Also baby products, hand cream, nail polish, shampoo, hairspray, gels.
Okay, quite a range already.
And mineral clay used externally, for skin, hair, face masks, even some dental creams.
But then it gets into items you'd really not imagine, right? Things maybe in constant contact with your body.
Precisely. The paper mentions things like scalar energy pendants, bracelets, and negative ion garments.
Negative ion garments.
Yes, those are explicitly mentioned. And the paper points out that these aren't necessarily niche items used by just a few people. Common consumers include children, young people, and the elderly, making the potential exposure quite widespread.
And the paper emphasizes how easily accessible these are now, which I guess is key. Thinking online shopping, local markets.
Absolutely. They're just a click or a walk away in many cases.
Easy access.
Which ties directly into, well, why this might be happening. The paper notes these products are frequently sold alongside scientifically unsupported claims.
Ah, the health benefit angle.
Exactly. Claims of improved circulation, detoxification, better flexibility, enhanced energy, even incredibly suggested links to cancer prevention.
Wow.
It seems to be leveraging the sort of mystique, or maybe the misunderstanding, of radiation for marketing, despite, the lack of actual evidence for these benefits.
So questionable claims driving sales of products with radioactive content.
That seems to be the picture painted by the research reviewed.
Okay, let's get into the science a bit. What kind of radioactivity are we actually talking about here?
Right. So the paper identifies the main players. These are primarily radioactive elements, radionuclides, that are part of the natural decay chains of uranium-238 and thorium-232.
Stuff that's naturally in rocks and soil.
Exactly. Primordial radionuclides, plus potassium-40, which is another naturally occurring radioactive element found everywhere, including in our bodies.
Okay, so naturally occurring stuff. But the critical question the paper addresses, how much of this is showing up in these consumer products? Are we talking tiny trace amounts or something more significant?
Well, that's the core finding from their review of studies across Europe and Asia, and the answer is it varies hugely. They found a massive range in concentrations. To give you a sense, for the uranium-238 decay series, they saw levels from, let me check the figures. Yeah, tiny fractions like 1.7 times 10 to the -4 becquerels per kilogram.
Okay, very low.
All the way up to extremely high levels. Over 2,800 becquerels per kilogram in some products.
2,800, that sounds like a lot.
It is. And for thorium-232's decay products, it went even higher, up to 12,000 BQ per kilogram. And for potassium-40, up to about 950 BQ per kilogram.
Right, and this is where the alarm bells start ringing, isn't it? Because the paper is very clear. Some of these concentrations are vastly higher than the recommended safety exemption limits.
That's exactly the point they make. International bodies like the IAEA have set these limits very, very low. For uranium-238 and thorium-232, it's around 1 1/1000th of a becquerel per kilogram, 1 by 10, 3 BQ-kkds.
So orders of magnitude lower than what was found in some products, like thousands, even millions of times higher in some cases.
Precisely. Some products are way, way over those guideline levels. The paper pulls out specific examples from the studies they reviewed. For instance, the highest levels for uranium and thorium were found in a bracelet marketed in Korea.
A bracelet? Wow.
Yeah. And mineral clay samples were also flagged. Some white cosmetic clay from Greece showed activity levels even higher than what's typically found in natural soil, according to UN data.
Higher than soil.
Though they did note some Italian clay samples were below the European limit, so it varies there too. But definitely some concerningly high levels reported.
Okay, so we have high activity levels. Let's connect that to what it actually means for people's health. The paper talks about effective dose, right?
Yes. Effective dose, often symbolized as E. Think of this as the key measure scientists use to estimate the potential long-term harm from radiation exposure. It accounts for the type of radiation and how sensitive different body tissues and organs are. It's particularly relevant for predicting the probability of stochastic effects, like developing cancer later in life. The unit is the sievert, or often milli or microsieverts for lower doses.
Okay, so effective dose is the key measure of potential harm. How does the paper translate that dose concept to actually using these products? What are people potentially being exposed to?
Well, the research they reviewed looked at the dose someone might receive through different pathways, like inhaling dust from powders or creams, maybe accidentally ingesting some lipstick.
Right, normal use scenarios.
Exactly. And also external exposure from things worn close to the body, like those bracelets or pendants or garments.
And what did they find in terms of dose levels?
Well, again, some concerning figures. The European Commission, for instance, has a guideline exemption level, suggesting consumer products like this shouldn't really give a dose above 300 microsieverts per year.
300 microsieverts. Okay.
But the paper highlighted products exceeding this. Examples cited included a sleeping mattress delivering an estimated 640 microsieverts per year.
Double the guideline just from a mattress.
Apparently so, based on that study from Korea. Also a sleeping mat and a fashion accessory, both estimated at 330 microsieverts per year, also available in Korea.
So definitely above that EU guideline.
Yes, and what's perhaps even more concerning, the paper mentions more recent reports showing potentially even higher doses. Get this. Some undergarments were estimated to deliver 1.57 millisieverts per year. That's 1,570 microsieverts.
Whoa.
And some pendants up to 2.81 millisieverts per year.
Over 2.5 millisieverts, just from a pendant.
According to those reports cited, yes. Now, to put that in perspective, the general public annual dose limit recommended by international bodies, the absolute limit for added radiation exposure, not including medical or background, is 1 millisievert per year.
So these products could potentially expose someone to more radiation than the entire annual public limit?
That's what those specific dose estimates suggest, yes, which is obviously a major red flag.
And the health risks. The paper confirms the basics, I assume?
It does. It states clearly that radiation exposure can damage tissues and organs, and the severity depends on the dose. Standard radiation protection knowledge. But the paper specifically draws attention to something important: the increased risk for children. It cites studies linking childhood radiation exposure to higher risks of developing leukemia, breast cancer, and thyroid cancer later in life.
Which is particularly worrying given you said children are among the consumer groups for some of these items.
Exactly. That connection is quite sobering.
Okay. So given the levels found in some products, the potential doses exceeding limits, and the known health risks, you'd logically assume there must be clear, consistent rules globally governing this, right? Surely.
Well, that's precisely where the paper reveals a really significant problem. There's a huge discrepancy. They actually use the term appreciable discrepancy in global regulations.
So not so clear-cut then.
Not at all. It's described as a total patchwork. For instance, you look at exemption limits, the dose level below which regulation might not apply. Malaysia sets its limit extremely low, less than 10 microsieverts per year per product.
Very strict.
Then you have the European Commission at 300 microsieverts per year per product, but with an overall cap of 1 millisievert per year from all such sources.
Okay, quite a bit higher than Malaysia.
Then you have major international bodies like the IAEA and countries including the USA, Canada, Australia, Vietnam, Singapore, the Philippines. They often align with the general public dose limit of 1 millisievert per year as the upper bound or reference point.
So 1 millisv seems common, but not universal.
Right. And then Indonesia uses 0.5 millisieverts per year. It really is all over the map, just looking at the dose limits themselves.
And are the approaches to regulation different, too?
Yes, very much so. The paper highlights completely different philosophies. Some places have outright bans on adding radioactive materials to certain things. Euratom, the European Atomic Energy Community, for example, prohibits adding radioactive materials specifically to cosmetics, toys, jewelry, and foodstuffs.
Right. Makes sense for those categories.
And some EU member states go further. Romania, Portugal, Finland, Lithuania, Slovenia are mentioned as banning all cosmetics and healthcare products containing added radioactive substances, a blanket ban.
Okay, zero tolerance there.
But then in contrast, you have countries like Germany, Japan, and Spain mentioned as managing it differently. They might require licensing, specific safety assessments, and testing if radioactive substances are present above certain thresholds.
So not a ban, but control and oversight.
Exactly. You see this clear contrast. Some jurisdictions say absolutely not in these products. Others say, okay, potentially, but it needs to be justified, tightly controlled, and proven safe within limits.
Okay. Here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe really frustrating. You've got these products, some making wild claims, easily accessible globally thanks to online sales, international shipping.
The global marketplace.
Colliding head-on with this completely inconsistent, non-harmonized regulatory landscape we just talked about. How is any consumer supposed to navigate that? How do you know what's safe if you buy something online from another country with different rules?
That's the crux of the problem highlighted. It's incredibly difficult for consumers to be informed. The paper does briefly touch on this concept of hormesis. It's an idea some proponents raise, suggesting that very, very low doses of a toxin, maybe even radiation, might have some beneficial biological effect.
The what doesn't kill you makes you stronger idea applied to radiation.
Sort of, but applied very specifically. However, the source is really careful to point out there is simply not enough robust scientific evidence to support these kinds of hormetic claims for these specific consumer products.
So no justification there based on current science for adding radiation.
Not according to this review and the major international bodies. And crucially, bodies like the ICRP, NRC, NCRP, UNACIR, all the big players in radiation protection, they consistently base their safety standards on the linear no-threshold model, the LNT model.
And LNT means?
It basically assumes that any dose of radiation, no matter how small, carries some risk, and that risk increases proportionally with the dose.
Yes,
There's no safe threshold below which risk is zero. That's the widely accepted conservative model used for setting protection standards.
Okay, so assume risk even at low doses.
Right. So the paper reinforces the fundamental principle of radiation protection. ALRRA keeping doses as low as reasonably achievable. And sticking to established dose limits, their conclusion on this is pretty clear. Products that result in doses exceeding recommended exemption levels or public dose limits, especially when they lack any scientifically proven benefit, should absolutely be controlled. The potential risks just aren't justified.
Okay, so wrapping this all up then, based on the paper we've dived into, what are the key takeaways for you, the listener? What does this all mean boiled down?
I think the major points are these. First, radioactive materials are being intentionally included in a surprising range of consumer products, including cosmetics and personal healthcare items. Second, this is often driven by marketing claims about health benefits that are scientifically unproven or unsupported.
Right, the dubious marketing angle.
Third, the research reviewed shows some of these products contain radioactive levels high enough to potentially expose users to radiation doses that exceed international and national safety guidelines or limits.
Exceeding the limits, that's crucial.
And fourth, perhaps the most critical point from a practical perspective, especially with global trade, is the significant lack of harmonized regulations around the world. This patchwork creates confusion and makes it incredibly difficult for consumers to make informed choices, especially when buying products online or from other countries with different standards.
That regulatory chaos seems like a huge issue.
Definitely. And the paper also highlights the practical difficulties this creates on the ground, things like manufacturers and suppliers often not providing clear information about the actual radioactive content in their products.
So lack of transparency, too.
Exactly. Or data on how many of these products are imported each year, or even exactly where they're being sold sometimes. Makes effective oversight very challenging. So the ultimate conclusion from the source really emphasizes the urgent need for international bodies and national governments to work together. Particularly, they mention, in Asian countries where these types of products seem quite popular, to harmonize regulations, set clear safety criteria based on science, and ensure manufacturers are actually complying with standards to keep doses for consumers. as low as reasonably achievable. LERI again.
Harmonization and enforcement.
That's the core message for regulators. But maybe a final thought, something for you to consider based on all this. In a global marketplace where regulations are such a jumble and products promising unproven benefits by adding radioactive materials can cross borders so easily, how can you, the consumer, possibly stay truly informed and feel confident about the safety of the products you might be using every single day?
That question really does hang in the air, doesn't it? A fascinating and frankly a bit unnerving deep dive into a surprising corner of the product's landscape. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the insights from this important research.